Bonjour! Welcome to a new episode of So French, a podcast about the twists and turns, intrigues and insights to all things French.
Every 2 weeks we select the best, most interesting and fascinating of French news stories, all brought to you from our studio in the heart of Paris. My name is Sara Bertilsson.
And my name is Stefan Vries.
This week we'll talk warplanes and we'll tell you how in the country of enlightenment, Asterix is suggested by a former president to be one of France's ancestors.
And of course, Descamps is here with a fresh French word of the day. But first...
So now there are 7.
Yeah, 7 dwarfs.
7 dwarfs, I'm not sure. Center-right primaries will be held here in France for the first time, actually, in November, end of November. Normally, what happens in France is that on the right side, so there's sort of this leader who emerges, everybody rallies behind the person, and they have their candidate for the elections. But turns out even French right conservative politicians are watching American television, and they all went this year for a primary. And this week, the candidates were validated. Stefan, what kind of field is this?
Well, they also organize the primaries because this is the party of Nicolas Sarkozy. Normally, Sarkozy, he was the president also of the Les Républicains, the Conservatives. He should have been their natural candidate, but within his own party, he is not very popular. So they decided to organize a primary. Now there are 7 candidates, only 1 woman. Nathalie Kosciusko-Morizet, she's the only woman in the group of 7 people, 6 men, 6 old men, all of them former ministers in the government of Nicolas Sarkozy. So these are 7 completely different candidates. We've seen Nicolas Sarkozy becoming more extreme right than Marine Le Pen the last couple of weeks. There is Alain Juppé, the former prime minister, who has a really good chance of winning this primary. He's more center-right, but he's also 71 years old, so a very old person. There's Bruno Le Maire. He's relatively young for French politics, but he's also a former minister.
Not that progressive.
Not that progressive, indeed. He's also very obsessed by the French identity. He's pretty right-wing. The only progressive measure that he wants to take is to close the ENA. That's a famous school where all the presidents and all the ministers are trained, because he thinks it's very bad for the system. It's one of the reasons why this system is not working anymore. He is a former student of the school as well, so he knows what he's talking about.
And no one seems to be very bothered about the fact this setup, these candidates are almost all white men.
Absolutely. If you look at the photo of the candidates, it's an all boys network. Fortunately, there's one woman, but it was really hard for her to get the endorsements she needed to become a candidate. But she managed. But it really shows how old-fashioned French politics is. And it's not much better on the left, because there are now many candidates already for there are also primaries on the left. All the candidates, apart from one, there's one lady, and the rest of them are all middle-aged white males. And even the lady who is a candidate, she's already over 60, 65, I think. So there's literally no young generation in French politics. Very sad.
And so we have 2 frontrunners, we could say. It's Sarkozy and Juppé. Where do you put your bets?
Well, I've been putting my bets on Juppé already for a long time, not because I like him, but for the simple reason that he seems to be a reasonable voice. All the candidates are becoming much, extremer every week, including Nicolas Sarkozy. Alain Juppé wants to incarnate the traditional humanist right, the Gaullist right of France, which was not very extremist, but more, decent conservatives. And a lot of people on the left like him as well. So they may vote in the primaries as well. It will cost them €2. Everybody can vote in the primaries in November. So I've already spoken to a lot of people who usually vote on the left. They said, I'm going to spend those €2 to prevent Nicolas Sarkozy of becoming France's next president, because whomever wins these primaries is probably the next president of France. Now, speaking of Sarkozy, he's been in the media all the time the last couple of weeks, and it looks like he's getting more and more extreme by the day. What has he been saying the last couple of weeks, Sarah?
He's been pretty much dominating media over the last couple of weeks. With statements and declarations, I would say one more outrageous and unexpected than the other. It all started about 2 weeks ago when he suddenly declared that climate change is not only human-made. He even questioned the whole thing. He was suddenly saying that, well, there has been climate change going on for 4.5 billion years. You cannot only blame man for this change.
Yeah, he also said the Sahara was already there before the man came. So the Sahara is dry. So that's my proof.
This comes from a man, who a couple of years ago had a completely different view, and who stated that, well, it's absolutely clear that man is responsible for climate change. We have to act. It's important that the world leaders are united in this fight. And now he completely 100-degree turn in this issue. And this, of course, created a lot of buzz, a lot of outrage from researchers, scientists, other politicians, fellow politicians on the right-hand side as well, and of course other candidates in the Republican primary field, of course, also reacting to this. He followed up he's been doing a couple of meetings over the last days. He followed up with a meeting being interrupted by some Gabonese protesters, people protesting against how France has reacted to the disputed elections in Gabon a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, the relations between France and Gabon have always been very strong. Like Ali Bongo is a personal friend of Nicolas Sarkozy as well.
And who has now declared himself a winner in an election, which is very much a disputed one. Anyways, Nicolas Sarkozy interrupting, shutting these protesters by saying, well, this is not Gabon. If you don't like it here, you should go home. So lately, in the last couple of days, a new media frenzy going on around Sarkozy, because he was declaring this.
À le moment où vous devenez français, vos ancêtres, ce sont les Gaulois. Au moment où je suis français, j'aime la France, j'apprends l'histoire de France, je parle le français et mes ancêtres sont les ancêtres de la France.
There was former French President Nicolas Sarkozy saying that if once you become French, then your ancestors are the Gaulois, the Gaelic people, basically, or Asterix and Obelix, if you like. So these Gaulois people, who were they? Where did they come from and why? That's something Maud Descamps will tell us. In the word of the week, bienvenue Maud.
Hi, Stefan.
So, les Gaulois, I just mentioned it already.
Yeah.
What is it?
What is it? Well, actually, just after Nicolas Sarkozy made this very weird statement about les Gaulois, 2 history teachers actually tweeted a few facts about the history of France and about the idea that the Gaulois are like one nation, which is actually a fantasy. Gauls people or Gauls population were actually the result of dozens of different groups, different culture, different languages, and they were never like one united population called the Gauls. It's actually a French fantasy before the Second World War. French politicians and French teachers or historians tried to build a common history for the French people that they could relate to. So they started to build a national novel or national story around les Gaulois. But just after the Second World War, the historians actually found it ridiculous to still go on this direction. So they rewrite all the history books in school.
So it's a made-up story.
Yeah, exactly. It's a made-up story just to make French people feel as one nation or one identity. And actually, if you look at les Gaulois, like the composition of the population, it was actually composed of very different groups, which we could relate to because France today is like very diverse. So we could relate to les Gaulois as they were, like very diverse population and not one identity and not one single population.
And this myth was also made very popular, of course, by the most famous Gaulois, Asterix and
Yeah,
Obelix.
of course. You had the cartoon, and the way of living is represented in the cartoon is actually very far from how les Gaulois actually lived. They were very well organized. They didn't live in forest or stuff like that. They weren't little villages isolated from each other. It was like a very well organized society. So the idea, the myth of les Gaulois is actually very far from the historical facts.
So in the story, Nicolas Sarkozy is actually the stupid guy. There's always a stupid guy in Asterix and Obelix.
Assurance Touriste is the bard.
Yeah.
He thinks he's a great guy,
Yeah,
but other people think...
he's worthless.
Exactly.
That's perfect for Nicolas Sarkozy. Merci beaucoup, Maud Descamps.
Thank
See you
you.
next week. This week, France sealed a deal with India to sell 36 Rafale fighter jets. The negotiations have been going on for months and months, and even if it's smaller than the original deal for 126 warplanes, it still represents 8 billion euros in revenues for France. It also confirms and strengthens France's position as one of the world's top arms exporters, because it's not only India that's buying French, they're also selling lots of bombs and other military gear to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and that's only in the last couple of years. So these are all very nice countries, aren't they, Sara?
Yeah, countries involved in some of the world's most complicated and deadly conflicts, one could say.
Yeah, so excellent clients for all these arms for France. So what about India? They are the world's largest democracy. There's no problem there.
And one of the world's largest arms importer as well. And yes, of course, you can't explain... If you're an arms exporter in an arms trade, of course, you're more likely to have clients who have an interest of having a big defense and use of their weapons. But it is true that India is not an uncomplicated story. India is involved in a long-running arms race, actually, with its neighbor Pakistan. And this deal was actually announced just days after 17 Indian troops were killed in an attack on an army base in the Kashmir region, which is a very disputed region between India and Pakistan. And of course, this is part of India's showing their muscles against Pakistan.
Does this French sale change anything in international relations?
Well, selling of weapons always, of course, involves the country in one way or the other in different conflicts. We've seen how France's relationship with Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest buyers of French weapons, have influenced in how France have reacted in other situations. For example, we had the discussions and the negotiations between Iran and the US and France and the coalition of Western countries, where France took a very, very strong position, almost blowing off this whole deal. And that is, for many, said in a way to sort of protect their relationship with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, of course, is the sworn enemy of Iran. So, we can see how it always has an effect on different things. And we also saw the Mistral deal, which was a big warship deal that France had with Russia.
And then they had to return it because of the embargo.
Exactly, they had to drop this deal because of Russia's annexation of Crimea a couple of years ago. Eventually, what happened to these ships?
Yeah, they went to Egypt.
They went to Egypt, another country involved not known for its very good human rights record, one could say.
Yes, indeed. Now, France always says that it's the country of the human rights, but they sell their weapons to all kinds of countries that really don't respect human rights. Why do they do that?
So it's, of course, a question of money. This is a huge revenue for France, and most importantly, it is creating jobs in France. Only last year, in 2015, it said that the arms deals were creating about 30,000 jobs in France. country, of course, struggling with a massive unemployment. Government have to show that they're moving forward, that they're creating jobs, saving the industry in France that has, over the last decades, lost a lot of jobs. So it's a question of money, of course.
Well, it always is, isn't it? And talking about money, if you are thinking, I'd like a Rafale as well, they will cost you about 75 million euros each. And I'm not sure whether your neighbors would like it, because the noise the French fighter jets make sounds like this.
8 years ago, the financial world was shocked by this huge scandal. The bank Société Générale, one of France's biggest banks, became the victim of a rogue trader. His name, Jerome Kerviel. It has become a quite famous name over the last years. Just in one weekend, the bank lost 5 billion euros. But that was 8 years ago. And this week, this case took a new turn.
Yes, indeed, Sara. Kerviel was convicted of 5 years in prison and also to a fine of 4.9 billion euros. I think he should have worked for that like 100,000 years. But this week, a French court decided that this fine would be reduced to only 1 million euros. Now, the bank also had to pay him 500,000 euros because he was fired wrongfully. So basically, it's a very good news of Jerome Kerviel. A reduction of 99.998%. And it also shows that the bank is not really, innocent in this whole case.
Well, you reported on this in 2008 when it was revealed. You went to the bank on Monday morning to attend a press conference with the board of directors. What was your impression then?
Yeah, I remember it quite well because it's in a huge building in a business district in La Défense. So I went there on the Monday morning to do my live reports. And during the press conference, I saw the arrogance of the board of directors. And I really thought this is not possible that it's just the work of one man. This must be a whole system. But you report what the directors say, and that was the only information we got at that time. But now, 8 years later, you see that indeed it was not a single man. It was a whole system that's basically has been malfunctioning. And that's also what the judges are saying now, that Jerome Kerviel is, he's not innocent, but he's also a victim of the system of the bank.
Well, that's said. So is he only a victim? Because now, we have here in France over the last year seen him in TV reports where he's sort of, portraying himself really as the victim, and now he wants to do good. Is that now the true image of Kerviel?
Well, it's the image, but it's not the reality, of course, because, in France, people like the underdog, people like small Davids fighting against Goliath and the money, everything. The French don't like money, so if you fight against the banks, then you become popular. But we should not forget that this guy was a traitor. He was a part of the system. He was responsible up to a point. Because before the weekend that he was lost 5 billion euros, he made like over €1 billion. So he took a lot of risks, but that's the culture of those banks. And now he's using the system again to show that he is a good guy. But of course, he hasn't really changed. He's just a rogue trader, like there are probably many of them in La Défense, but also in the city in London. And he just was unlucky to be caught. But I think there are many more Jerome Kerviels. He has certainly not become a holy man, as a lot of French people believe.
So what happens now?
Well, it's interesting because the judges said that the bank is also partly responsible. And this is important because Société Générale received over 2 billion euros of a special tax return for victims of fraud. But now it seems the bank was also responsible. So that means that they were maybe not entitled to this tax return. And after the judgment this week, the French Ministry of Finance said they will re-examine the tax return and they may ask it back. So that's more bad news for the bank, who already lost 5 billion euros in just one weekend. Now I have a question for the French president, François Hollande. Did you see my tweet this week? I mean, I know he's following me on Twitter, but he actually never replies. But there was a similar question this week from no less than superstar Rihanna, but it took a while for Hollande to reply. Sarah.
Well, this whole story is about Rihanna being part of this project to make money and gain support for a project for children in crisis-hit countries and regions. And so she sent out this tweet saying like, hey, François Hollande, well, being polite, have you read my letter? And it actually took some time, like a lot of time in Twitter sphere time count.
How long?
24
Wow,
hours.
that's huge. It's like the dinosaurs were still there around in internet time.
Well, he did eventually come up with an answer saying, well, thank you, dear Rihanna. He's got away with words. Thank you for your commitment. You'll soon receive my detailed answer. Education is indeed my first priority. Well, it's nice of the president to answer Rihanna, of course, but one should not remember is that Rihanna has how many Twitter followers?
65.9 million followers. That's more people actually than there are living in France. Maybe François Hollande thought, well, she's more important than me. She has far more voters at least. And Rihanna answered already a couple of hours ago, this is great news. Looking forward to it, she said. Well, it all sounds like a fairy tale to me.
And a relation to be continued, maybe. That wraps up this edition of So French. You can follow us on Twitter. That's at So French News. We still don't have 65 million followers, but please join the ones that are already following us. If you have any questions or suggestions, send us an email. Our address is sofrench@sofrench.news.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can do that in iTunes, in SoundCloud, but also on the radio application TuneIn Radio. You can share the podcast with your friends. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode of So French. We hope you'll join us then. Thanks for listening and au revoir.
Au revoir.